All right. Well, last time we started a study on Elijah. So if you missed last week, you're still getting in on the ground floor here because we only covered about 7 verses. Incidentally, this picture is a statue from Mount Carmel. That's supposed to be Elijah. I don't know if it really looks like Elijah or not because I don't know what Elijah looked like, but that's supposed to be Elijah. And then can you put the picture that has the points on it up there? That's a view from Mount Carmel looking out over the valley of Megiddo, or you might know it better as Armageddon. But that plain, that peaceful looking plain is actually the valley of Armageddon. And that's seen as from atop Mount Carmel. So anyway, just a couple little interesting little things. We'll talk more about where the setting for tonight's study isn't Mount Carmel, it's Zarephath, but we'll get into Mount Carmel in just another week or so. So if you want to find your place, we're going to be in 1 Kings chapter 17 tonight. So find your place there. So last week, just to kind of quickly recap, last week we talked about we were introduced to the person of Elijah. And basically, Elijah comes on the scene at a very critical time in the nation of Israel. He is a prophet to the northern kingdom of Israel. And the king of the northern kingdom of Israel at that time was who? King Ahab. And King Ahab had a really not godly wife. And his wife was who? Jezebel. And Jezebel comes from the area of Phoenicia, particularly around Sidon. And so there the worship of a Canaanite god named Baal is prevalent. And so she introduces Baal worship. I say introduces. I'm not saying they were totally unaware of Baal worship before the time of Ahab and Jezebel, but she certainly popularized it, and she pushed to get Baal worshipped to the exclusion of every other god, including the God of Israel, Yahweh God. So Elijah comes on the scene. He appears before King Ahab, and he says, "As the Lord lives," which this is significant because remember, Baal was the prevailing deity of Israel according to the king's wife. But he says, "As the Lord lives, there will be no rain on this ground until my word is given." And then God takes him and hides him out at this brook by the brook Cherith. I hope I'm saying that right, and which fed into the Jordan River. Well, and ravens came and fed him. So that worked for a while, but eventually, since there was drought in the land, that brook dried up, and so now God has got other plans, and the plan is not going to be that it's going to rain just yet. So God's miraculous provision that he did with the ravens now is going to kind of get ratcheted up just a little bit. He's going to use a widow woman and provide a miraculous provision for him. That's where we left off. Any questions on the first 7 verses before we go further in? All right, let's take a look then at verse 8 of 1 Kings 17. "Then the word of the Lord came to him, saying, Arise and go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and dwell there. See, I have commanded a widow there to provide for you. So he arose and went to Zarephath, and when he came to the gate of the city, indeed a widow was there, gathering sticks. He called to her and said, Please bring me a little water in a cup, that I may drink. And as she was going to get it, he called to her and said, Please bring me a morsel of bread in your hand. So she said, As the Lord your God lives, I do not have bread, only a handful of flour in a bin, and a little oil in a jar. And see, I am gathering a couple of sticks that I may go in and prepare it for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die. And Elijah said to her, do not fear, go and do as you have said, but make me a small cake from it first, and bring it to me, and afterward make some for yourself and your son. For thus says the Lord God of Israel, the bin of flour shall not be used up, nor shall the jar of oil run dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the earth. So she went away and did according to the word of Elijah, and she and he and her household ate for many days. The bin of flour was not used up, nor did the jar of oil run dry, according to the word of the Lord, which he spoke by Elijah. All right, let's talk about this a little bit. First of all, this takes place in a place called Zarephath. Where was Zarephath? Yeah, it's in the area of Phoenicia, very near the city of Sidon. Now, why does that sound familiar to us? Who else was from Sidon? Jezebel, that's right. So you see what God is doing here. He's sending Elijah right into the heart of Baal worship. So in a sense, God is taking the fight to Baal, to Baal's own doorstep, if you will. And so now we've got the Israel's prophet, the prophet of the one true God, that will be engaging Baalism in the seat of Baalism, this area of Sidon. Now, God tells Elijah doesn't know what he's going to do. He just knows that the brook has dried up. The ravens aren't bringing bread no more. And so he doesn't really know what we're going to do next, but he is assuming that God has got a plan, and sure enough, God does. By the way, that's the way God usually works. I don't know that I could point to a time in my life where God said, all right, now, Mark, here's the plan for the next 10 years of your life. You just follow the plan, and then I'll check back with you, every couple of years or so to see how the plan is going. That's certainly not, God is God. He can do what he wants to. I'm not saying he never has done that or never will do that, but that's not generally how it works. Usually God says, okay, you follow me today, and here's where we're going. And if you say, well, what about tomorrow? Then he says, well, I'll be back with you tomorrow, and I'll let you know what you're doing tomorrow when tomorrow gets here. So Elijah didn't really know, but God comes to him when the brook dries up, and he says, I want you to go to Zarephath. Now, this must have been a little bit disconcerting to Elijah because he's a prophet to northern Israel. He's not really a prophet to Sidon, to Phoenicia. He is not, this would be enemy territory. But this is what God tells him, and he says, I want you to go to a widow woman there because I have commanded her to provide for you. Now, what does it mean when it says he commanded a widow? Does it mean like that, God spoke to Elijah, thus says the Lord, and he gets a direct word from the Lord? Did God speak directly to this widow woman? Is that what's meant there? Yeah, so it seems to be commanded more in the sense of he has orchestrated the situation to bring about his desired result. And the reason I say that is because the woman doesn't seem to know much about Elijah. She seems to understand that he is a servant of the one true God, but she certainly doesn't understand that she is going to be the one to provide for him, because he asks her, can you bring me a drink of water? She starts to get the water and says, oh, by the way, can you bring me a little bit of bread too? And what does she say? I don't have any bread. I've got this little bit of flour. I'm going to bake it up. We're going to eat it and die. That's about as hopeless. She was about as hopeless of a woman as you would ever find. But so it's not so much, at least it seems that God spoke directly to her and said, now there's going to be a prophet come. I want you to feed him, as much as he has directed the circumstances to bring about his desired result. And a lot of times that's the way God works in our life. He will work in the circumstances to bring about His desired result in our life. Faithfulness. God, we're going to talk some about God's faithfulness tonight, and that is something that you really you only learn by experience. I've come to realize I can tell you that God is faithful, and in here you can understand that and say, yes, I believe that. But when it comes to a crisis of faith, a crisis of belief, you really only learn the faithfulness of God by going through it. Now, so this woman, this is an interesting character here. Elijah comes, he says, can I have a drink of water? She goes to get him. He meets her near the city gate gathering sticks. Now, what's she going to do with the sticks? She's going to build a little fire. She's going to cook this bread. That's her idea. And so he says, hey, can I get a drink of water? So she goes to get, now water at this time, even for her to give a drink of water, in this time, that was a great sacrifice. Because remember, it's a drought. And apparently the drought has stretched all the way to Sidon, because that's why she and her son are starving to death. So she goes to get him a drink of water, and he says, hey, by the way, can I have a little bit of bread to eat? And the woman says, what does she say? Tell me what she says. She says what? As the Lord your God lives. Now, leave that verse up there for just a second. This is quite a statement, because where is this woman from? She's from an area that doesn't worship the one true God. They don't really know the one true God. You see the word Lord, and you see where it's in all capital letters. Capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D. That is the translator's way of letting us know that is the proper name of God. Some of your older translations may translate that something like Jehovah. Most modern, and nobody really knows how to pronounce it, because the Jews stopped pronouncing it because they thought it was too holy of a name really to pronounce. So it's kind of fell into one of those areas where nobody really knew how to pronounce it, because nobody's used it for years. But that is the proper name of God. So she is saying, as Yahweh, your God, lives. Now she's made a couple of statements. Number one, she has indicated that she believes that Elijah is a man of Yahweh God. That's pretty significant. She also has made the statement that she believes that this God lives. Now, I told you last week about the Canaanite mythology about Baal, that the reason why you would have dry seasons and time of drought is because Baal would come under submission of the god of death and basically die, and then some other deity would have to bring him back to life, and then you would get rain again. So what's going on in the land now? It's drought. So what would that, if I were a Baal worshiping person, what would I believe? That Baal is dead, right? But what does she say? As Yahweh, your God, lives, as surely as your God, the Lord, lives. She's making a statement here about Elijah's God, that she believes that he's got some kind of power that Baal apparently doesn't have. That's significant for this. And yet she stops short of calling him my God, doesn't she? She doesn't say, as the Lord my God lives. She doesn't say, as the Lord our God lives. She says, as the Lord your God lives. So apparently whatever faith/belief that this woman has, it's a work in progress. And so And a lot of people, that's what you find. Like it is a work in progress. And so she is going to come to believe in the one true God. How much she believes in him right now, it doesn't seem to be a complete faith. She has some faith, but it doesn't seem to be a complete faith yet. So while not necessarily confirming that the woman was a follower of Yahweh, and I'm going to use that term just for clarification. I hope it doesn't offend you that I use it. I don't use that word a lot because I figure if the Jews don't like to use it, then I probably don't need to either. But I'm going to use it for clarification's sake, and I mean only the utmost respect for the Lord when I use the word. But it at least shows that she believes that he's real and Elijah is his representative. Now, this miracle so we read the miracle. You picked up on that. So he says, go and get me some bread. She said, I don't have no bread. I just got a little bit of flour. I'm going to make a cake, and I'm going to bake that, and me and my son are going to eat it, and then we're going to die. And he says, well, if you'll make me a little cake first, then your flour bowl will never run dry as long as the drought lasts. And she does this, and sure enough, she's able to eat. Her son is able to eat. And so this is a great miracle. But this is a little bit different than the one described in the first 7 verses where the ravens fed Elijah. And what are some things that you see different here that makes this an even, in some ways, even more remarkable miracle than being, sitting by a brook in Israel and being fed by ravens? What do you see? It didn't run dry. That's right. This one didn't run dry. What else do you see here? First one takes place where? Near the Jordan River. Where's the Jordan River? It's in Israel. Where does this one take place? Not in Israel, right? In the heart of Baal worship. So you've got that going on, and then you've got a woman, a widow woman feeding Elijah that's about to die. It doesn't say the ravens were about to die. It doesn't say they were about to starve to death. Apparently the ravens fed Elijah out of their abundance, out of their excess. The woman, she literally has one meal left. She's going to go in. I'm about to go in and eat. Imagine the desperateness of this woman's situation. Yeah, exactly. So you know that you're going to go in. You have one. Now imagine the faith it took for her to do this. You have just enough food that you're going to have one last meal, and your son is going to have this one last meal, and then you are going to probably watch your son die, and then you're going to die too. And now you've got this guy who you've never met before says, feed me first, and everything will be fine. How much faith would that take? And how desperate would you have been? In Luke, I want to read you a passage in Luke chapter 4, verse 24. This is when Jesus is rejected in his own town and his own people. Verse 24 of Luke 4, Jesus said, assuredly I say to you, no prophet is accepted in his own country. But I tell you truly, many widows were in Israel in the days of Elijah when the heaven was shut up 3 years and 6 months, and there was a great famine throughout all the land. But none of them was Elijah sent to except Zarephath, the region of Sidon, to a woman who was a widow. And he goes on to talk about something that God did with Elisha. We'll say that till we get to Elisha. But here's the thing. Like, of all the widow women, think about this. All the widow women that were starving to death in Israel, but God sends Elijah where? To Sidon, to the most unlikely candidate. And that's the way God often works. it's usually not the one that you would expect. It's usually the most unlikely candidate that God chooses to use. And it's usually after the people who are supposed to be his people have rejected him. The people of Israel had rejected God, so God sends his prophet to the Gentiles, the widow woman in Sidon, and she will receive the blessing where the supposed people of God rejected God's blessing. You see the same thing in the New Testament where Paul first goes to the Jews and they reject. And he said, then your blood is on you because God is now sending me to the Gentiles. And he goes and becomes an apostle to the Gentiles because by and large the Jews rejected the message of the gospel, and so that opened the door for the Gentiles. So this is a remarkable miracle because it takes place in a Gentile land with a Gentile woman, a very desperate one, and the amount of faith. Here's my question, and I don't know the answer to this, but I can probably guess pretty well. How many widow women in Israel would have had that kind of faith? If Elijah had showed up at the doorstep of most of the widow women in Israel at that time and said, hey, if you'll feed me, I know you got one meal left and you were going to feed your son with it, but I'm asking you to give it to me first. Would they have the faith to do it? Would you have the faith to do it? Now you've done stopped preaching and gone to meddling, right, Brother Mark? All right, why would God choose such an unlikely candidate as this widow to provide for his prophet? Hang on, let me get over here. Do what? She's saying something about Abraham sacrificing his son. I'm not sure I'm making the connection.
And the widow was just desperate to give up that son, but she was willing to do it.
Oh, so she's saying like Abraham sacrificed his son in faith, or was willing to do that, and this woman was willing to sacrifice her son in faith. I don't know that she knew that he was going to die. I think she somehow or another believed that God was going to take care of him. Think about it. In some ways, think of it this way. What did the woman have to lose? Right? What did she have to lose? I got one meal left. Now think about this. I ask you, would you do it? But think of it in this term. I got enough for one meal, and then I'm going to die. So I'm either going to die today or I'm going to die tomorrow. But either way, I'm going to die because I know I don't have any more food. I do have a man of God that's come in here and he said, if I'll do this, then I'll live. Now, only God can do it. What have I got to lose? Here's the thing. This woman was about as desperate as you can get. There's no way in the world that this woman could provide for Elijah. She couldn't do it. If Elijah would have showed up and said, hey, God sent me over here for you to provide for me, what would she say? Well, you better go back and talk to him again because I don't have anything. I've got one more meal. I'm going to eat it and die. That's pretty much what she said. So the woman couldn't provide for Elijah. The only one that could provide for Elijah was who? God. It's the same God. It wasn't the ravens that provided for Elijah. It was God who used the ravens. It wouldn't be the woman who provided for Elijah. It was God who used the woman. And it's God who provides for us and works in our life. And he uses people to do that. Sometimes he uses all sorts of things to do that. But it's still God that does it. Now, the description of this woman, how does that... Remember, God never uses miracles just for a magic show. There's always some point behind it. So this woman actually becomes an illustration of Israel, if you will. How is the woman an illustration for Israel? What was the woman about to do? She was about to die. And what's the only thing that stood between her and death? God. That's right. What was going on in Israel? Famine, right? They're about to die. What's the only thing that stands between Israel and death? God. Now, if you want to carry the illustration on further, you can talk about it on a spiritual level as well. What's going on in Israel spiritually? Well, they're dying. And the only answer, the only hope is not Baal, and it's not Ahab or Jezebel. The only answer, the only hope for Israel is who? God. So that's the idea there. Questions on those verses? All right. Oh, it's starting to get good now. You think that's a miracle. We're about to see a doozy here. Let's look on to verse 17. Now it happened after these things that the son of the woman who owned the house became sick, and his sickness was so serious that there was no breath left in him. So she said to Elijah, "What have I to do with you, O man of God? Have you come to me to bring my sin to remembrance and to kill my son?" And he said to her, "Give me your son." So he took him out of her arms and carried him to the upper room where he was staying and laid him on his own bed. Then he cried out to the Lord and said, "O Lord my God, have you also brought tragedy on the widow with whom I lodged by killing her son?" Seems an odd thing for a prophet of God to say, doesn't it? But we'll talk about that in a minute. 21, and he stretched himself out on the child 3 times and cried out to the Lord and said, "O Lord my God, I pray let this child's soul come back to him." The word can also mean life. It's in the Hebrew, it can mean either one. Then the Lord heard the voice of Elijah, and the soul of the child came back to him, and he revived. And Elijah took the child and brought him down from the upper room into the house and gave him to his mother. And Elijah said, "See, your son lives." And the woman said to Elijah, "Now by this I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord in your mouth is the truth." She didn't know that before? Interesting. Over a period of time, in the aftermath of this miracle that God provides, and her flour bin never runs empty, and she's able to eat, and she's able to provide for her and her son and Elijah, and all is well and good. And then one day the boy just stops breathing, presumably dies. And what is the woman's conclusion about this? Yeah. Oh, and she goes and basically verbally attacks Elijah, which that's what people do. If they get mad at God, they can't beat up God, so they go take it out on God's representative, and that's what she's kind of doing here. She says, "You came to me." Now, I think this is amazing, because the woman would have been dead a long time ago. Her son would have been dead a long time ago if Elijah hadn't have showed up. But she says, "You came just to bring my sin to remembrance and kill my son." So her idea is that God spared my life only to punish me by killing my son, even though her son would have died anyway. Do people ever do that today? People get mad at God. And I see it all the time. People get mad at God, and they have this idea that, because I'm a sinner, I was a sinner, and I did these bad things, that somehow God is going to punish me. All right, if you're a Christian, and I know you know this, somehow or another you got to get it from here to here. Because if that's your perception of God, here's the truth. Like, your sin, if you're a Christian, it's already been punished on the cross. There's nothing left to punish. And here's the thing: if God would have wanted you got, if God wanted to get you, you'd be got by now. It's kind of like there's a Andy Griffith episode. I've watched every episode of Andy Griffith 100 times, but there's this one where Andy and Barney and the state police or state investigator or something, they're up. Rafe Hollister has a still in the, up in his cabin in the hills, and so they start up there, the state inspector, he starts going up there, and Rafe shoots his hat off, and the guy says, he comes running back around the police car, and he says, "That man's up there trying to kill me," and he says, "No, he ain't trying to kill you. If he was, you'd be dead already." He said, "He's just trying to scare us." And then he starts talking. And here's the thing: if God wanted to kill you, you'd be dead by now. I guarantee. Like, if you're still here, then God don't want to kill you. If God wanted you got, you'd have been got, because God only takes one shot and He don't miss. So. But this woman has this idea that a lot of people have today, that whenever tragedy or seeming tragedy comes my way, that it must be because God's out to get me. This idea that God is capricious, that God, plays games. Oh, He spared me, from starving to death only so He can kill my son now. That wasn't what was going to happen. We're going to see a great miracle take place here in just a minute as this plays itself out. Now, so she goes and she basically vents to Elijah. "What are you doing? Why did you even show up?" And so what does Elijah do? He says, give me the son. Give me the boy. And then what does he do? He prays to God. But it's an interesting little prayer. And what does he say? "Why have you brought tragedy on the widow with whom I lodged by killing her son?" So he asks the question, what does he ask? Why? You ever asked God that question before? Did you get an answer? Sometimes you'll get an answer, sometimes you won't. Elijah asked the question that everybody asks in times of crisis. Why? God, I don't understand. Have I ever asked it? You bet I have. I still do. I don't think God is offended by that. I really don't. I think that if you don't know what's going on, I don't think God takes offense to you going and saying, "Hey, God, I really don't. I trust you. I just don't get it. I don't understand what's going on. I don't know what's happening. But I trust you." And that's basically what I see here. He's questioning, what are you doing, God? Is this how this is going to end, that you're going to bring tragedy on this woman that you've used to help me? Is that how it's going to go? But then what does he do? He takes the boy, he lays him on the bed and stretches out over him, basically praying for his life. He intercedes on behalf of the woman, and he trusts God with the outcome. And I think that's the lesson here, that you're not always going to understand what God is doing. That's just the way God works. There's times I don't understand what God is doing. And I'm supposed to be God's man. But there's times that I go to God and I say, "God, I don't know what you're doing. I really don't. I don't get it. But I trust you." But you have to act in such a way that you believe. Act in such a way as to demonstrate that you believe God knows what He's doing and that you trust Him with the outcome. In the movie Facing the Giants, the coach is telling his team, he said, we're going to give our very best to God. And if we win, we're going to praise Him. And if we lose, we're still going to praise Him. But we're not going to walk off this field without having given God our best. if you look in the story of Daniel, the three, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, when they're threatened to be thrown in the, I guess it was them in the fiery furnace, wasn't it? And Daniel got the lions den. They were being threatened to thrown in the fiery furnace. They say, we know our God is big enough to rescue us. But even if he doesn't, we're still not going to bow down and worship your statue. So there's times that you're not going to know what God is doing. There's times you're not going to understand, but you have to trust anyway. And you have to say, even if it doesn't turn out, the circumstances doesn't turn out the way I want them to, I'm still going to trust God that he knows what he's doing. And that's what we see in Elijah here. So then we get this strange picture. Elijah stretches himself out over the boy. He lays him down on his bed. This is a dead child, by the way, or I say child, probably maybe a teenager, maybe a young kid. He stretches out over him 3 times. What's with that? What's he doing? Or what's supposed to be symbolized in that? Don't key too much on the whole idea of 3. People want to try to pull, the 3 day, Jesus in the tomb 3 days. I think you're really stretching a little bit to get to that point. But what about the stretching over him? What's that about? Do what? Not so much protect him probably, but you got a dead child here, and Elijah is alive. So by stretching out over him, basically the idea is that my life would pass, the life of Elijah would pass to him. Now here's the way it kind of works. It's like as Elijah is God's representative, he's God's man. Whenever the life of God, and the life of God was in Elijah, the life had left the boy. But when, and here's your theological key to this, when the life of God touches death, God always wins. It's like when Jesus touched the unclean didn't, when Jesus touched the unclean, be it a leper or whatever, it wasn't that Jesus became unclean, but the unclean leper became clean. When the living man of God touched the corpse of a dead boy, God wins and death is defeated and the boy comes back to life. Ultimately, death is defeated by God through the person of Jesus Christ. So we get, that idea as well. Now, after this, the woman's faith seems to be strengthened. What do you see that tells this woman's faith now is stronger than it was to start with? What does she say? Now I know that you're God's man and you speak his truth. Now, she seemed to have implied that she knew this to start with. Elijah shows up and she says, well, as surely as the Lord, your God, lives. So in that statement of words, she's saying, I know that the Lord is real, and I know that he is alive, and I know that you're his man. I know it here. But after her son comes back to life, what does she say? Now I know it. I really know it here. Now, how did she come to know that? Did she go to 6 months of Bible classes with Elijah so that he could teach her all about the faithfulness of God? No. She experienced the faithfulness of God. And here's the truth. And I've come to this conclusion in my own life. I've watched it in my boys, and I've watched it in other people. the faithfulness of God is something that you only can learn by experiencing it. I can't teach you about it. I can tell you about it. I can tell you God is faithful, and I can give you testimony after testimony after testimony of things that God has done in my life, of things that I've seen God do in other people's lives, and that I have known, that I've been in church with. And you can all say, amen, I believe that really happened. But when you're in the crisis situation, and you're the one who can't pay the bills, you're the one who is about to watch their loved one die, you're the one who's watching their family spiral out of control, you're the one, and you may have heard all these stories about how faithful God is, but what are you still going to say? God, what are you doing? And what are you going to do? You're going to worry. You're going to doubt. And it doesn't mean you're a bad person. It doesn't mean that you're a person of no faith. It just means that God is about to demonstrate His faithfulness in a way that you haven't seen before, and you will only learn His faithfulness by going through it. I can tell you God is faithful, but you'll only come to know it when you live through it. And I'm going to tell you, it's not easy to live through those times of trials. It's not easy at all. And I've lived through a bunch of them. And some of you have lived through more than I have. But I'll tell you, the only way you get to know the faithfulness of God is by going through it and experiencing God's faithfulness. You may know it here, but after you go through it, you know it here. And that's what we see in the woman here. Now, what God does here is a direct attack on Baalism. He has punched Baal in the teeth at this point. Why would this be such an attack on Baalism? The woman apparently wasn't a Baal worshiper. So how is this raising of the dead? Incidentally, this is the first recorded incidents in the Old Testament of someone being raised from the dead. So I think we got something pretty significant here. This is the first incident of a resurrection. And it seemed clear enough to me. I mean, it says the boy stopped breathing, but it also says his soul came back to him. So, I mean, to me, that pretty well indicates that the boy was dead. So that being the case, you have the first recorded incidents of a resurrection in the Old Testament right here with Elijah and this woman's son. Why was this such a big deal? That's right. That's right. You see that? Baal, the reason that they would say the drought is taking place is because Baal is dead. He needs someone to resurrect him. He's powerless. He's dead. He can't defeat death. Baal sure couldn't bring the boy back to life. Baal was dead himself. But God could. Now I want to show you something kind of interesting. So now the King James, New King James, it doesn't bring it out as well. I don't think the King James brings this out. I know New King James does not. The word in 20, I want to say 2. No. The woman who owned the house. 7, is that 17? Okay, 17. You see there, it says, the son of the woman who owned the house became sick. Now, that is true. That's the meaning of it. But the word, that's one word. That's because the woman who owned the house. The word translated woman that's not really the word. The word means something like mistress. And some of your translations may have mistress. Okay, here's the cool thing about that. There's a Hebrew word that means woman. That's not it. The word that's used there is the feminine version of the word Baal. So the word Baal means master or lord. So this is the female version, so hence you get mistress, not master, but mistress. Do you get the irony here? The Baalot, the mistress, could not bring her son back to life, but God could. Baal could not bring the boy back to life, but God could. That's the idea there. Questions on those verses? I gave you a couple of little application questions here that we can think about and maybe have a little fun with as well. Here's the first one. The woman of Zarephath obviously had some understanding of the one true God, but it was too small. What parallels do you see in the New Testament as well as in our own lives today? So let's start with the New Testament. So the woman she understood a basic understanding of God, but her view of God was too small. Where do we see that in the New Testament? Exactly. I mean, that's what comes to my mind is the idea of the disciples. They understood that Jesus, they seemed to understand a basic understanding of who Jesus was. But it was incomplete. And I think that's why a lot of times you say he'll do a miracle or something and he'll say, don't tell nobody. Because the idea seems to be if you were to tell someone, you would give a incomplete picture of who I really am. He asked the disciples, who do people say I am? And they said, well, some say you're a prophet, some say you're a teacher, some say you're Elijah. And he said, well, who do you say I am? And Peter says, well, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. Well, that's the right answer. But then where is Peter when Jesus is being arrested and tried and about to be crucified? He's out hiding in the garden somewhere, right? And all the disciples. And then word comes in on Resurrection Day, hey, the tomb is empty. Jesus is alive. And did they all immediately believe it? No. He had to literally appear to them, and then they believed it. And Thomas says, if I don't see it with my own eyes, I'm not going to believe it. If I don't feel put my hand in his side where the spear was and feel the nail scars in his hand, I'm not going to believe. So the disciples, they had a basic understanding, but it was too small. I think a lot of people today, and a lot of church people, a lot of Christians, we have a basic understanding of God, but our understanding is too small. God is the God of Sunday school. He's the God of Vacation Bible School. He was the God of my grandparents that could solve a 5-year-old's problems. But can he really solve a 40-year-old's problems? Can he really solve the fact that, I'm losing my job, that my family's falling apart? Can he really solve the problem that this person that I love more than life itself is about to go away from me and I'll never see them again? Can he really solve? Is the God of Sunday school still the same God of my life today? And most people would answer that question, no. Now, they wouldn't say no. They would say, oh, well, yeah, God is faithful. But what they would do is just kind of quietly drift away from God, because in their mind, while they have a basic understanding from Sunday school as a 5-year-old kid of who God is, that understanding is way too small to grapple with the problems in their adult life. So what they need is to be confronted with the faithfulness of God. And the only way that comes about is by walking through and living through these crisis situations and seeing the faithfulness of God. Here's the last one. Johnny Rocket's traveling caravan of evangelistic miracles. That's got a ring to it, doesn't it? I came up with that myself. I might patent that. Johnny Rocket's traveling caravan of evangelistic miracles has just rolled into town. On the first night of the Big Tent Revival, Johnny encourages all the widow women to give their Social Security checks to his ministry, and in return, they will receive big money blessings. And for his sermon, or perhaps you might call it a proof text, he uses this passage, 1 Kings 17, 8 through 16. Evaluate Johnny's interpretation of this passage from a theological perspective. Huh? He missed it. That's right. So I got to tell you this, and this is really why I put this in here. So there was a televangelist based out of Dallas. I'm not going to use his name. I don't know why I'm affording him that courtesy. I don't think the man deserves it, but just to keep things clean, I won't mention a name. But his initials are RT, and I'll leave it at that. All right, that's probably a give it away. I tuned in. So I like to watch, back before I was a pastor, I would like I told you, I couldn't get enough church. And so, before church, I would tune in to whatever preacher I could find, whoever was preaching. Well, I tuned into this guy one day, and he's reading this passage of scripture about the widow woman feeding Elijah, making the first little cake. And he reads that, and I thought, this is going to be really good, this will be a good sermon. And he goes, now, all of you out there, God is telling you to support this ministry. And you're thinking you don't have the money to do it. But I'm telling you, like Elijah told the widow woman, make me a little cake first. You send this ministry a check first, and then you won't have to worry about it. God will provide for all your needs, but you need to do this first. And I thought, I don't think that's what that means. I'm not a Bible scholar. I knew less about the Bible then than I do now, and even at that time, I thought, I don't really think that's what that means. So, I went on to our church, and I didn't think much more about it, and a couple of weeks later, not that Sunday, but maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, I think, okay, well, I'm going to flip through channels. It's a little bit of time before church. I'm going to catch a little bit of a sermon, before church, kind of a warm-up to church. And I'm flipping through, and I find this guy again, same guy. And I thought, oh, that's that same guy. I wonder what he's preaching on today. He read that same passage. He said that same 10-minute sermon, boy, I use that loosely, and 20 minutes, on a 30-minute program, he had a 10-minute sermon and 20 minutes of begging for money. Now, you just need to put God first. You need to write this check to this ministry here, blah, 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 and he's going through the same thing again. And I thought, and I wondered, was it a replay of the thing? And I thought, no, it's because he's saying different words, but the same thing. It wasn't like, oh, they replayed his sermon. It was a whole new sermon on the exact same thing. I thought, So I went on to church. So about 3 weeks later, I'm flipping through channels again. Land on this dude. Guess what he was preaching? The exact same thing. And then it dawned on me. This man knows one passage of Scripture. He has learned to twist it to serve his own greedy purposes. And he is talking little old ladies out of their food stamps and Social Security check so he can buy his 5th jet plane and mansion in the Bahamas or whatever. And he's using this to do it. He really doesn't know Scripture. He only knows this one thing that he can twist into doing what he wants. So the difference in what Elijah did with the woman and what, Johnny Rocket or this other televangelist that I was referencing, the difference is that the widow's aid to Elijah, and this is significant, the widow's aid to Elijah didn't result in Elijah's monetary benefit. The woman didn't give Elijah anything that made him wealthy. It didn't help his monetary standing at all. It only fed him and kept him alive. That was it. And this miracle came about as a result of God's demonstration of his power over Baalism, not as a result of greed on Elijah's part or on the woman's part. So be careful when people try to take and twist scriptures for their own selfish purposes. Yeah, I don't know. I quit watching him, and I don't know. I quit tuning into him. I started watching the Methodist preacher. He had better theology. You know the guy. Well, no, I'm not going to say that. Just going to let it roll. But anyway, yeah, I stopped watching this dude. So anyway, questions, comments on Elijah chapter 17. Elijah. Yeah, we're in the book of Elijah. 1 Kings chapter 17. Any questions, comments? All right, let's close in a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for your word, for the chance to study it, Lord. I just pray that